Whether you're for the Boston Olympics or against, the main question for people in the city is what comes after. In the short term, the Olympics could mean plenty of construction jobs and some disruptions. In the long term, the talk's about the benefits versus drawbacks, but in the even shorter term, it's about a race to put together a plan with enough public support to satisfy the national organizers. Our guest is the champion of Olympics coverage for local impact. We'd like to welcome the staff reporter with the weekly paper, the Dorchester Reporter, Lauren Dezenski. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with what's been going on today, because those people from the U.S. Olympic Committee, they're either talking to or at least calling on the phone to talk with pretty important people. So what's happening with that?
So basically, there was a meeting in California between Boston 2024 and the USOC after Bid 2.0 was rolled out, which is basically the latest plan with even more details, kind of the nuts and bolts of how, a 2024 games in Boston, what would happen. They said that they were going to meet, with organizers and, kind of kick the tires with people, in Massachusetts in the future. This is that meeting. It's a meeting with Boston 2024, but it's also with Mayor Walsh and with Charlie Baker. Charlie Baker is being reached over the phone. He's the governor, obviously.
Now, I know this thing is supposed to be studied to all kinds of great levels of detail, but it also occurs to me that especially the governor, he's got to make up his mind about this before he can really get answers to some very important questions, too.
The governor's made it clear that his posture will really be determined by the findings of the Brattle Group, which is the independent consultant that he, Senate President Stan Rosenberg, and the Speaker of the House, Robert DeLeo, kind of decided that, they were going to hire an independent consultant to kick the tires on, this Olympic plan. And it's still not really clear when that report is due out. The governor's office did tell me that his conversation with Boston 2024 today won't be informed by anything from the report. He hasn't had any, preliminary findings or anything, but it is due out at some point this summer.
And I guess there are questions out there whether it's going to be covered by insurance, if there are any overruns, and you've also got the question about, well, if it's taxpayers picking up the money, what are we talking about? City taxpayers, state? What is it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions as to how, where the burden is going to fall and, to whom and how. Boston 2024 has proposed this kind of 4 layers of insurance to, protect the taxpayers. But at the end of the day, the city of Boston is still the signatory on, basically the documents to the IOC. So the city of Boston is really still on the hook. And so until Boston 2024 can show that the city's taxpayers and, state to a certain extent won't be held financially accountable for any sort of issues with the games, then, then things will be okay. But until then.
Another factor here is a referendum that could be on the ballot, I guess, next year. Different groups have...
Or this year.
Or even, all right, different times, different questions.
Exactly.
It's confusing. Well, walk us through that a bit.
So there's 3 ballot questions kind of in the works. The first is a citywide ballot question. It's non-binding and really doesn't look like it's going to happen. It's proposed by City Councilor Josh Zakem. It would be for the November 2015 ballot, but again, a snow piles chance in South Boston, at least in August. Chances for that happening. The second ballot question is one that would happen on the presidential primary ballot. So it would be early 2016. Yes. Early 2016, that would be shaped by the legislature. Again, not really clear how that's going to work out, but that is a possibility. And then there's also the November 2016 ballot question. There was language put forward today by the kind of anti-Olympics people that would kind of bring it to fruition. But Boston 2024 has also made it clear that they are supportive of a November 2016 ballot question. So that's the one that looks probably the most possible if it does happen at all.
The other standard here is the U.S. Olympic Committee. They want a certain level of public support for this by a certain time. So what exactly are they talking about?
It's still kind of hazy as to what they want and when they want it. I actually spoke with someone from the USOC today, and they said that there really is no red line when it comes to support can't drop below X number by X date. That being said, September 15th, which is in just a couple months, the USOC is going to submit the name of the applicant city to the IOC as, the city that, would host the games. And for both the USOC and the IOC and even Boston 2024, no one wants to get into a situation where they're bidding for something where there, are no chances. So support needs to increase and needs to increase quickly. Arguably, it needs to get up beyond 50% in both the state and city, before September.
What about the climate around this so far? Because there was a lot of opposition to certain elements of this plan earlier this year, the things at Boston Common, even Franklin Park.
Right.
There have been changes. There have been some places added. Harambee Park's been added.
Yeah.
And it looks as if they've diffused some of the opposition locally, but how much does that matter?
It still kind of stands to be seen. Boston 2024 is listening when it comes to these venue-specific proposals. A lot of people pushed back on, the Boston Common beach volleyball location, and they moved that. That being said, a lot of people have pushed back on the Franklin Park proposal, and that still hasn't been moved. And there are a number of people making noise about the Squantum Point Park beach volleyball venue, which is the backup one. So it still kind of stands to be seen. Boston 2024's talking point, for this is that, bid 2.0 isn't the final iteration of the bid. There are still changes that can be made. So I think public response to venues is important. But that being said, if Boston 2024 can't prove that they can have a, purely insured Olympics, or one that, completely doesn't affect the taxpayers, I think from a higher level, they have many more issues than, just a venue-specific concern.
Well, this plan has certainly intensified the talk about new development on the Columbia Point Peninsula and even across Morrissey Boulevard near JFK UMass Station. But you've got to do some infrastructure work to make that doable. What do you see out there?
So the infrastructure improvements are interesting because those are actually state money. That's taxpayer money. And when we talk about the proposals that they've put forth, Boston 2024 basically has said that they have a fix for Kosciuszko Circle, this nightmare rotary choke point that I drive through at least twice a day, if not more. And they really, for the first time, have proposed a change to turn it into a four-way intersection that's signalized and everyone would stop and go. An issue with that is that it's actually on the National Registry of Historic Locations. So that doesn't put a complete stop to any sort of change, but that is an additional hurdle. But the interesting thing about all of the infrastructure improvements there is that the local elected officials are supportive of those proposed changes. For many of them, the issue previously was that no one had acknowledged that those would need to be changed and that, there would need to be state money. So to a certain extent, just simply because they're admitting above board that those changes need to be made, gives the political leaders in the area kind of the coverage to support that. That being said, the politicians are the ones that are going to need to go to Beacon Hill and actually make those changes.
What about the scale of growth here? Because, there has been talk about doing things on the peninsula for a long time, and what's going to happen when the globe moves out. So that's not new. But do you think the Olympics plan has really changed the scenario in a significant way about the scale and even the kinds of things, maybe?
I think it's a larger proposal than it was before. At least going off of the Columbia Point Master Plan, which had been kind of in the works for a while and was, I think, finalized back in 2011. So this is way before the Olympics were talked about. Locals wanted to bring, mixed use, affordable housing into the area. They saw, a vibrant neighborhood in that location. And so again, to a lot of the people in the area, the Athletes Village, to a certain extent, is a continuation of those goals.
And UMass wants to expand.
Exactly. So, UMass can get the dorms too, and that's what they've always wanted to do. So, to a certain extent, they are on board. It just becomes the question of how do you get the state buy-in and the state money, or even a master developer to, buy into this vision and come in and build it out.
Well, we should mention you're going to be following this every iteration along the way. So if people want to keep track of you, what's the best way?
So I have a weekly newsletter called The Relay, which you can follow on Twitter at The Relay 2024. And then there's a little subscribe button that you can click there.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us, Lauren Dezenski.
Thank you.
From the Dorchester Reporter. We'll have more news in just a moment.